Robyn Emerson is Africa Housing Forum Manager, Habitat for Humanity International Africa, is it?
Yes.
Good morning, Robyn.
Good morning.
Welcome to Kenya's biggest conversation.
Thank you very much.
I know it's not your first time on SpiceFM, but it's your first time on the hot seat.
Yes, it is. A little warm.
Yeah, yeah, it's a friendly seat.
Yeah.
I mean, we talk about housing. Housing is about warmth, is about accommodation, is about making people feel at home. So feel at home, Robyn.
Thank you very
Said the
much.
spider to the fly.
We're here to talk about affordable and decent housing. We've got to start with very many definitions here. So first, I think the first definition is the distinguishing between Habitat for Humanity and UN Habitat. Let's start with that.
Yes, that is a very common, people think about, when you hear habitat, they immediately either go to, yes, you are the UN, or who is Habitat for Humanity? So they have those two questions. So Habitat for Humanity is it's been in existence now for since 1976. It was started by a Christian organization of people in rural Georgia in the U.S. who were looking at housing issues and how they can come together and resolve these housing issues. And it mushroomed and it blossomed and it took over across the United States. And it is now all over the world. It's an international organization resolving housing issues, bringing together partners to resolve those issues. And right now they're at the border on Ukraine to deliver housing and various other places around the world where there's a need, where people get displaced from their housing right of dignity, safety, and shelter.
Okay. And what does UN Habitat do?
And so UN Habitat is under the UN structure. And so it has a different mandate because it works with governmental entities to pull together the resources, making certain that the mandates, the SDG 11 and other housing goals that are inside of there, pulling together the governmental relations. Habitat for Humanity is an NGO independent organization.
Okay. We're going to talk about affordable and decent housing.
Yes.
In this country, one of the big four agenda is affordable housing, delivering 500,000 units, blah, 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 by the end of the 5 years. Okay, so we know we are far off that mark, but we've seen some affordable housing projects in several parts. We know there's the Buxton one. We know there's the one in
Yeah,
Ngara,
there's Pangani,
Pangani,
there's Park Road.
right? All those.
Yes.
But what is affordable housing? What does that mean?
Yeah. So affordable housing is it is the housing that's below market rate. And it is, as we talked earlier about some of the challenges of the promises of the road. And then there are challenges that come in, if you will, that displace how that actually gets delivered and how it gets carried out. But affordable housing here would be for people that are in that medium income of 50,000 shillings per month. And so that then, you know, by a standard, you really want your housing to be about no more than 30% of your income. And so that's about being able to pay a rent of 10 to 15,000 per month. And so we are definitely at a huge shortfall of achieving that and delivering that housing need. As you mentioned, there is a promise of 500,000 units by the end of this administration's term. And at this point, we've delivered, I think, about 1,100 units. And so, and that's where we are inside of that. So then what does that mean? I've been just talking about housing now for about 11 years. And every year we are saying that we have a 250,000 unit deficit. And this is not that if you don't achieve it one year, that the 249,000 that didn't get like, yes, exactly. It compounds and it grows and it grows and it grows. And so that's what we are saying is the impact of thousands of people across Kenya and across Africa that are without decent housing that provides shelter for them, security, most definitely dignity. But here's the other thing. It provides financial leg to stand on, because we know so many people, that's where you get your economic growth, is you have something to collateralize. You have something to leverage. And that's how people send their children to school. That's how people do all sorts of other things to grow up the economic ladder.
Robyn, I have an issue here.
Okay.
You've said, so in the definitions, and these are the official definitions of affordable housing, you're looking at people who earn an average of about 50,000 shillings a month and spending about a third of that in housing.
Yes.
That's about 15,000
Yes.
shillings. Now, you know very well that a majority of the Kenyan formally employed workforce is in that bracket of up to 50,000 shillings and even below. But also that they are paying over 20,000 shillings in rent. So does it mean that a majority of these people who earn 50,000 shillings a month are living in unaffordable housing?
That's exactly what I'm saying. Because if we're talking, if we did the math, 50 minus 20, there's 30,000. We've seen inflation going up. We've seen taxes going up. We're seeing what the pinch is on somebody's day-to-day life to have a family, to secure for them, to provide education. We haven't even talked about education. We haven't talked about clothing or anything else that it takes to live. It is difficult when we are not making provisions at that level.
So we're saying that there are folks who are actually looking for decent housing and are having to pay much more for it than they ought to.
Yeah, well,
with
as
for what they earn.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
As it's financial rules or financial management, if you will, what we tell people. And the thing is not the problem, but the challenge is that our upper middle class don't necessarily feel that. That closeness, if you will, or the tightrope of life, if you will, because there's maybe a little bit more breathing room inside of life, if you will. But at the 50,000, it is every shilling is critical so that you can get those aspects of life inside of there. And so when we see bread going up, we can't see it as something just as a throw off. It actually impacts what people are going to do, where their family are going to live. Now, we haven't even gotten to the need for housing at the 5,000 level. Like, we haven't even touched on that need.
Yeah.
We haven't even.
Okay, so take us through the levels, Robyn.
Yeah.
What is, I think Eric was alluding to that earlier. So what is decent housing? If you're saying you earn this amount, should it matter what you earn to then say that housing is decent? What would then characterize decent housing?
Yeah, well, first, housing is a right. Housing is a right that is enshrined in the Constitution. It's been signed by several treaties and adopted. And so, first of all, it is decent is shelter, protection from the elements. It is all of those things. And so, when we talk about the impact of that not being there, we know that if it rains, what happens to you and I when we hear rain coming down? We have a different thought and a different experience of people that aren't in a decent housing, because the water does come through the roofs. They do come through your front door. You and I don't have to think about that. But decent is that the safety and the security of your elements and yourself and your body and your so forth are protected. And that is a right for everybody. And so that's what we mean by decent. And then adequate is enough, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Decent. Let's properly define it. A decent house, what must it have? Is it about the square feet? Is it about the materials used? Is it about access to sanitation and water? What exactly constitutes decent housing?
So first, the basic services is definitely the part of decent housing. So that is access to water. It is sewage. It is the other elements, if you will, electricity. It is all of that, and we are lacking in providing those basic services to everyone in need and across the country and across the continent where it's lacking. And so that is definitely a part of decent housing. The aspect about the size of it, it varies, if you will. Now, we do know that there are people that are living in some sizes, 10 by 10s, and we know that people are existing in those spaces. But then we want to ask ourselves, is that decent?
Yeah.
So there's two different questions we have to be asking ourselves here. And then, and then the materials, right? So the materials, because of various aspects, and just because we need to be thinking about environmental aspects, we need to be thinking about the degradation of some of these materials. We are looking at introducing various alternative building supplies and building materials that does bring into this decent aspect. And so there is the Kenyan Building Institute that is innovating on various aspects. We also have what we call a shelter tech competition that has people think about what are these new technologies that can arise so that we can meet the needs of people's housing requirements.
Just to stick on just a little bit longer on that. So then decent is not pegged to how much you earn. Because somebody might have a certain amount and say, well, okay, for this what I have, then this is all right.
That's correct.
So we're saying it's not pegged to what you earn. Regardless of what you earn, decent then must fall into these parameters.
That's correct. That's exactly correct. Yeah, and it's actually government's responsibility that is there for each and every person, with its citizenry. And so, how do they govern that? How do they govern that? It is inside of planning. It is inside of development. It is inside of looking at the private developers when they're developing what is actually happening. But we know that the government struggles to do that in Kilimani. We know that they struggle to do that in various other places. And so we can imagine the difficulty, or almost the throw off nature, if you will, of some of the informal settlements as well.
People always think about, when you hear, affordable, decent housing, they think urban areas.
Yes.
And then they think about the informal parts of the urban areas. But housing is a right, like you said, for everybody across the country. So I'm going to ask you, if somebody living in a mud walled house, grass thatched, with no cement, with just a door and a small window, is that decent or is it not?
Well, so decent does have context. So decent does have context to it. And so so inside of, and again, we talked about, various economic levels. So it has context. Do we desire for that to be the standard and the place where someone stays? Are they protected from, if we come back to it, are they protected from the elements? Are they not being, I used to do work in the jiggers field also. Are they not, the ground level, is this one that is not allowing for infestation and so forth? But the thing about that, Eric, is that traditional housing actually has a lot that we can learn from. We don't want to scrap a lot of what was being done at those levels because in our mind, how we see them, what we might think about them. But we have so much that we can learn from those traditional housing structures.
There are two concepts that keep running through my head. We're talking about affordable housing, but I'm thinking of low-cost housing.
Yes.
And I'm thinking about a third element, and that is technology that enables the cost of these houses or the housing to actually be not just only affordable, but also to be cheap. And that's where this discussion about what you call traditional housing comes in. Bricks are made from mud. The only thing is it goes through a process before it becomes a brick. Now, the question I would ask is, institutions that train people to use materials that are locally available to do the very thing that they want. We used to have village polytechnics. We used to have polytechnics they still exist in a manner of speaking. But in the absence of the training of individuals who can make these things possible at every level that we are speaking of, even as we talk about low-cost housing or cheap housing, the people who will be involved will be business people. And the more business people are involved, there's a profit element that has to come in. And if the profit element has to come in, then how then do you merge this with the two phrases, cheap housing, affordable housing? And then you bring in the element of profit.
So the government does have a building technologies researcher innovation. And so it is for them to spur and to make certain that these new innovations are continuing to be developed. And CT, there are so many people that are taking on these new building technologies with various brick technologies and so forth. Even Habitat for Humanity, inside of our shelter tech and our learning and our centers, we have supported many people that are doing just that and bringing that about. But I will bring this back to you. It is the government's responsibility to find out ways to keep these at a low cost, if you will. So they have to, it is the government's way to how do you provide a way for these to come to the market in such a way that they do stay accessible. Because once they start to be a premium or something accessible, they then affect the cost of the housing. And so government is still trying to figure out I don't know if it's tax incentives. How do you reduce the cost? How do you put in more ways so that these can be more accessible and greater use? And the other part is the production of them to scale. That's actually, another big challenge is that if you're producing such a limited number, then that does make it more exclusive and elusive, if you will.
For the longest time in this country, if you looked at housing, say in urban areas, the biggest developer was actually the government for the longest time, or municipalities as they were in those days. And we had national housing. It's what they did. And there are many estates strewn right across the country that were national housing projects.
Yes.
Okay, the name still exists, national housing. As to whether the animal is still alive, it's a completely different story.
It is. It's been building houses in the counties.
Okay, and how many per year, say?
I don't know.
Precisely. What I'm trying to say is, they were once the major player in this field. Putting up 2 units when you know very well that the demand is probably 100 units. Yeah, you are not doing nothing, but you are really not helping solve the problem. Why am I saying this, Robyn? I'm saying this because when you see the government knows full well what it ought to do. The government even has the structure within which it can do this. The question I would ask is, why are they not doing it? That is the question I would ask.
Well, I know that a lot is being done. Newly, it's how is it being picked up? We know that there's a Kenya mortgage refinance that has come on, and it's trying to make its impact.
Is that thing really alive?
It exists,
actually.
yes, yes.
And it's working.
Kenya Mortgage Refinancing Corporation, yes.
Yes, and it's working.
People are putting money into it. I think the modalities of how then the money can get out of it to go into housing are also aligned. There's something.
Something.
Yeah, there's something.
There's a
Only issue, just like with everything with government, is how many people know about it. How many people need to know about it? So, I mean, Kenya Mortgage Refinancing Corporation would make sense if everybody knew about it and was putting money into it.
That was the purpose, really. It was intended for everyone to put money into it. Anyway, this isn't a form of flogging. I mean, government effort.
I'm curious as to, go ahead.
Please go ahead, no?
I'm curious as to the model then that Habitat for Humanity works with. So what exactly happens here? Because obviously there's a provision of, habitable spaces for people to come. So what model do you use to make sure that, and how many, put-ups have we seen around Kenya?
yes. So Habitat for Humanity, we've actually been across Africa now for over 40 years. We're in 9 different countries across Africa. And our model is to work with partners inside the side of advocacy, and so working with people to look at what are the development structures. How do we convene people together to talk about housing from all the different spheres and so forth. So Habitat for Humanity, that's our role. But we're also, Habitat for Humanity is known for people actually going to sites and building houses. I think oftentimes people think about Habitat for Humanity, they've seen Jimmy Carter or some other people actually being somewhere and building houses.
Yes.
And so it's really highlighting the need for housing. It's bringing housing to such a forefront, if you will, because I think when we think about the various economic contributions to a society or the GDP, we hear of education, we hear of health, but housing, does it get the prominence of its role? Housing contributes 16% to a nation's GDP, and that's because of the jobs, because of the manufacturing, because of all of these various elements. And so Habitat for Humanity brings housing to the forefront of discussion when we talk about one's development plans, and making certain that it doesn't get left as a byproduct, and we see it as a key driver inside of delivering on all of these other items is how we see it. Is without housing, where is one existing? Is that home decent?
Right. So on whose shoulders does responsibility lie? Are we looking at then government responsibility for putting up this affordable and decent housing? The government vis-a-vis the private sector, which obviously is a commercial enterprise, upon whose responsibility does it lie primarily?
Because it's a right, it's ultimately the government's. And so it's the government to think about how we're going to do that through the various partnerships. Because government, again, 10 years, 250,000, that's 3 million units, if you will, that we're just here behind in Kenya. In Nigeria, 14 to 16 million deficit. In Ghana, we're looking at almost 4 million deficit. And to do that, all of that is like a $30 billion. So it can't do it on its own. We know that there's so many demands. And so its government's job is to get out of the way, if you will, facilitate this, make certain that it's to the values and the standards that the government sets, and make certain that it is delivering, if you will, delivering, because it has a real impact on a day-to-day basis when we aren't addressing this.
It's 7:30. Time for us to take this quick break.
This is the Situation Room.
Eric Latif Nduoko, CT Muga, our guest this morning. Robyn Emerson from Habitat for Humanity International Africa. She's the manager for the Africa Housing Forum that kicks off tomorrow. Robyn, what are the main challenges? I mean, you've worked with, you've looked at what the governments are doing across the continent. What are the main challenges to the realization of affordable housing?
So I like to think of those challenges in kind of a triangular fashion, if you will. There's land, if you will. So we have land issues. How do we unlock some of the challenges with land? As we've seen in various places, we've seen in Makuru, just around here, Makuru, Kwajenga, people that the access and the ownership and so forth of land is very tenuous. How do we get tenure of land? It's a huge aspect that we are having challenges with all across Africa, but also women rights to land ownership and use, and cultural and socioeconomic, all of those aspects is a huge critical factor. But then also the building process itself is a huge challenge inside of housing. If we're talking about the methods and the ways of doing business in various countries, if we're talking about the regulations in various countries, if we're talking about the provision, and then the materials, if you will. I mean, just moving from the mindset of stone to other new building technologies has been a huge leap just inside of the market, if you will. So how do we even just bring in new technologies that introduce that does drive down the cost, and it provides mass and additional housing. But then also there is the other aspect of the people aspect and the rights and so forth. This is a huge aspect inside of the housing sector that we are really having challenges. Now, encapsulate all of that inside of this ticking time bomb called climate change. So I kind of like to wrap all of that inside of this ticking time bomb that is telling us we have got to come up with ways that we make certain that people are located in places that are, the barriers are not degrading. We are now building on ravines. We've seen sometimes where we're building on ravines. So we have to be thinking about, again, how this climate change, how we can be building and repurposing properties so that we are not finding ourselves on the back foot. We've seen in South Africa the floods that have affected so many people, and those people are now homeless and looking for shelter. It is a huge aspect that encapsulates this already huge, enormous challenge of housing.
But Robyn, when you bring in the environment and you paint this picture, and you've painted it really well, I have to ask the question, what role then does planning play in all this? Because people building where they shouldn't build, tenure, all these things, are these... Anyway, I've asked the question. So
You've asked it to an urban planner, yes. And I think sometimes we walk down the street with either our heads covered or our eyes or something another. They're like, did you plan for this? Like, did you plan for no pavement? Did you plan for... No, planning plays a critical part. But I think as we've seen in various places, we can plan, but who's doing the implementation? That's where the challenge is because now we have various interests that come in and want to take those plans that are, if you will, thought out because of, hopefully because of public participation was in there, and the people have said, this is what we'd like to see, and this is where we think these are the best places. And I also have tacit knowledge of this place, and I know this place floods regularly. So I want to tell you, don't build that thing there, or don't put that there. But we do want more spaces for our children to play and be safe. We do want more parks and public spaces and green areas. We do want that. But what happens, and we've seen this even in G Park, really beautiful plans for public spaces, but then
interests.
interest comes in. And so when we talk about corruption, this is one of the places. It's not just in all of the other spheres of society. It is front and center inside of the built environment sector as well. And it has a huge impact when we go off of we get off the path and we forge our own direction. I think we see it in so many ways, but it is critical that we do stay on plans that will give us the quality of life that we all desire.
So the problem is not lack of funding. The problem to have decent and affordable housing or green spaces, open spaces in cities, in smaller towns across country is not for lack of funds. If from what I'm hearing, then it's the lack of implementation, it's lack of will to get it done, and it's just corruption.
Yeah, there are aspects that it is seeping out, faster. Like it's kind of the image of you being in the boat and the water is in it, but it's coming as much as you are solving a problem. More water is coming inside of the boat, and so that is kind of what we are. But it's not just even the government's role. We also, Habitat is to how do we empower people to exercise their rights and attend those spaces where those decisions are being made. Because how do we not have those decisions be made in cloak areas, and so how do we the participation and transparency and inclusion, all of those aspects are critical so that the visions that we do have, what we are aspiring for society, are getting carried out and they're being known by all.
As you're speaking, and I'm thinking of some of the low rent areas that we have in big cities, it brings one to the perennially the economic question: why is there the urban drift? Why do people leave wherever they are and come to the urban centers? And again, I go back to planning. Why is it not possible for the planners, again, you'll come with the implementation, but why is it not possible now that we have a county system for the very things that draw people into the so-called big towns? Why can this not be divvied up so that there are other units of habitation that exist in a specific area, so the very problems we're speaking about doesn't actually arise in the first place?
Well, about 10 years ago, Nairobi County did set out and do a Nairobi Metropolitan planning, the new plan, Nairobi Urban Metropolitan Plan, sorry. And it set out to do just that, CT, where we would have nodes around where these development centers are happening and where we would see different aspects that are taking place. That was, I think, about almost 8 or so years ago. And we need to ask ourselves and go look at where's the evaluation of that? Where have we reached on the development of that plan?
Why did they do this plan?
Well, it's actually a constitutional requirement in the Urban Cities Act that each county that does that has a plan, and then they're supposed to report on a regular basis on the status of that plan's progress, and every 5 years do develop a new one. So as we see in Nakuru, that our latest city, they're to develop their own, and that's the participatory part, and that's why we all need to be asking, where is that, right? And that's part of what that educational part is. And when we have multi-stakeholders coming together and evaluating that, we can work together and not be so shocked when we might read and be like, wow, we are so far off, but we can on a regular basis be seeing, oh, wait a minute, if we don't do this, this is going to have an impact. Or what did you decide to do as a mitigating factor so that these housing goals are still achieved? It's all of our duty to be interested in that new plan and to find out it's well over its evaluation time.
The definition of these entities that we refer to as towns, cities, townlets, and what have you, are those is it also implicit in the definitions of what it is that those entities must have for them? So if they then do, then it means that the very thing that, for instance, people crowded Nairobi for, if Nakuru is supposed to live up to its new title, then literally everything that Nairobi has, Nakuru ought to have.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a new city, but it does at each population level. It does have, listed out inside of the Constitution what that calls for, if you will. So it is a big deal for them to have been elevated to that status. And so, at each population level, it says you would have this, you would have access to that, and so forth. And so, yeah.
Okay. Take a deep breath. Take a deep breath.
Breathe in and do.
It's my day to day.
Ready? Go.
I'm ready.
Fire, go.
Oftentimes by way of comparison is where you see then the gaps and you say, okay, could we then have done this? Let's take a look at nations that then were able to build for their people, who were, and I say that carefully, but who were able to make sure that this right then is delivered to its people. What is it that they did that made it possible to say that there was not going to be a housing problem, low cost, decent, affordable, high cost, whatever, but making sure that people have a place to live? What is it that was done? If there are examples of a few here and there, I mean, I know a few, but from what you've seen, from that urban development planning eye, what was done that is lacking in some of these other countries that we see?
I think.
Good thing is that you're an urban planner.
Yes.
Yes.
So you have studied this thing.
Yes.
So you have several case studies. You give us one.
Well, I mean, I come from. I've lived in some of the best, well-designed cities around, and like Seattle and Austin, Texas, and some of those. It's what the thing is that what happens is you don't deviate from your plan. I just can't say that enough. I just cannot. I can't say it enough. I just can't say
Robyn,
it.
we have a problem.
Houston, we have a problem
Yeah,
here.
we plan for the sole purpose of deviating from it.
That
I'm
is in place so that we can
Deviate,
deviate from
yes.
it.
Deviating is part of the plan. Plan item number one. Deviate.
Yes.
And then carry on.
Then move on.
Evaluate said deviation.
Deviation, yes.
But
Come
no,
with evaluation, deviate further. Yes.
but I think that if we see it that way, what we've done is we're leaving it to actually the people in government to do that, and that's not where the sole responsibility lies. It lies with all of us to be informed of that plan, to understand what is in the plan, what is my right, how do I access and go and demand for it, to say, listen, this was supposed to be happening in my ward, this was supposed to be happening in various areas. Now that's not to say that there's not a lot happening. There is a program of the slum upgrading program that the government has implementing, and there are a lot of challenges to that, because on the other side we do see evictions still happening in various places, and so I think that it's how do we keep a singular focus? How do we keep housing as a necessity, as a right by all, and that we all play a role in together to figure out how we can carry this out. In addition to what are the innovations that are necessary on the largest scale as possible, that they're accessible, that they're implemented, but we can't give up and we can't be discouraged because of maybe what is clause 1 or 2 that may be getting carried out.
So you'll be hosting a forum from tomorrow for the next 3 days that brings in various stakeholders from government to private sector to organizations such as yourselves to everybody else, to the financial sector, that are looking at involvement in the housing sector. A similar thing happened in December. City. The Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company, it's in existence. In fact, in December, it hosted a national forum in Naivasha. On the 8th and the 9th of December, it was called the Affordable Housing Conference. It brought in various stakeholders. Was Habitat for Humanity represented?
It's possible. I've only been
Yes.
there.
They were all there. And they came up with, what they called the declaration.
Yes.
So this is the Naivasha Declaration.
Yeah, the Naivasha Declaration on housing, on affordable housing, We, the hosts of the Affordable Housing Conference, having met with key stakeholders from the public and private sectors over 2 days in Naivasha, Kenya, express our commitment to work together in leveraging demand and supply linkages and charting new frontiers in the delivery of affordable housing across the Republic of Kenya. We note, number one, and I want to focus on that, the existing challenges in the affordable housing ecosystem, including high property prices and related high cost of land, high incidental costs, delays in property registration, related lack of effective offtake, among others, present an opportunity for discussion on ways in which to break barriers to the affordable housing program. So there were several points, there were 10 points of what they noted, including the affordable housing deficit in the country, the need to build systems among stakeholders, the need for public-private partnership, the need to accelerate investment in greener housing, need to remember who affordable houses are built for, hence accounting for the lower income population, need for additional technical capacity in implementation of land reforms, the need to unlock housing incentives, which would contribute to significant cost reductions, the need to amend the definition of infrastructure bonds in the Income Tax Act in order to facilitate corporates to raise sustainable long-term funding to support housing and other social amenities. So all those things have been discussed. Everybody knows the Ministry of Infrastructure and Housing was present, the National Treasury was present, key stakeholders were present. These challenges, everybody, even without going to Naivasha, could have told you these are the challenges. All right. So even as you discuss this, let's say the housing forum that's going to take place, and these are the challenges. How do we unlock? How do we move away from these challenges to solutions? Yes. How do we get this affordable housing? The big one, if you talk to developers, they'll tell you, cost, man. I've got to buy land. Land is expensive. Then I've got to buy the material. That's expensive. Then I've got to do the registration, and that is expensive. By the time I'm going to market, that thing is not in the bracket of affordable housing, and it will not be.
Yeah. I think one of the things about the housing sector is there are so many people singing from that hymnal of affordable housing and those various items. But what we are lacking, if you will, is the ability to track where we are. There's so many people at different areas that it's difficult to actually know, are we moving, if you will, in lock and step, if you will, in these directions. And that's what we hope the Africa Housing Forum will do, is that because it's people from all across Africa, it's not just Kenya. We'll have over 12 African countries representatives being here in Kenya in person. It's a 600 people event that will be also in this hybrid event. And so we're not talking about one country, if you will, this is what you're doing, this is what we're doing. What we're saying, Africa-wide, let us all know as a benchmark where we are. And not to say that this information is not known, if you will, because it's very known, and there are various activities and conversations about affordable housing. I think what we're looking for is what are we measuring, and how are we holding people accountable, and how are we moving this forward? That's what we hope out of this Africa Housing Forum, is that we have come up with some way to actually, on a unified level for Africa, that we have outlined these activities, and then governments will hold their own discussions. It's their duty to do that, but it's our duty to be able to say, well, where are we in reality on those items? Where have we reached on those items? Are there new partners that need to be brought in? Are we thinking about affordable housing financing schemes that are being innovative so that we can meet these demands? All of this innovation is not going to be housed alone in governmental offices and the people that work there. We need innovation. We need thinking about how we can solve this. And so the Africa Housing Forum is looking to bring all of that together, to start to document it, to walk together, and that we're looking at what our progress is. That's our dream for that.
Since time, I mean, even as these conversations are being had at this, through this forum and such, has there been improvements? That's question one. Question 1A is, do you then find that having the conversation, and if there has been improvement, that development begets development, right? You see it and it wants to mushroom into something else. So then do you think that having the conversation and keeping it front and center then will invite more development and more people just doing what they're supposed to do.
Yes, well, actually, this is the first Africa Housing Forum. So, in the various other regions where Habitat exists, in Europe, in Asia Pacific, in Latin America, in the Caribbean areas, they've been having these housing forums in their regions. And it is doing just that, as you talked about. It is bringing together, and development is beginning development, and they are seeing the progress. And that's why we are excited that Habitat has made the investment to convene for the first time this discussion on the Africa region, so that we can do just that, and we can all be together and singing again on hopefully one page, if you will, in that hymnal.
different hymnal altogether.
Yes. So I can allow me to come back and report and say what the difference that this South Africa Housing Forum has made.
What I would like to say will take much longer, so I will hold my peace.
You'll hold
I'll hold my
completely.
peace. Completely.
Okay. Move towards affordable housing. I mean, it's a good thing. I keep saying it's a good thing that the president said this is going to be my big four, part of my big four agenda, because what it has done is mainstreamed the conversation about housing and exposing what exactly the gaps are in affordability of decent housing in Kenya. Now, they have made some progress. How many? 1,100 units?
Yeah, about that.
From 500,000.
With a target of 500,000?
500,000.
You know, at least.
You see? Again,
At least kuna kitu bwana.
it's just a small matter of 4,498,000.
490,000. It's an achievable target.
Eric,
Shortfall.
if you knew the bottlenecks that people who would want to partner with the government have to face in order to even implement these, the bottlenecks, so forget the cost, just the bottlenecks.
The biggest hurdle is the mind of government.
It's the mind.
All right. So the president will sit on talk all these things, but then the people who are sitting there to implement. We've had conversations with the PS for housing, Hinga. He's just coming, from private sector. He's thinking, let's move, and then he sits back and he's told, we are moving.
And this dinosaur,
Siwe ngoja, tunasonga bona PS. Usijali.
things actually doing.
Yeah. So for example, last week, we need to have a meeting next week.
And that meeting, for us to actually discuss it in the manner that is required, we need to go to Naivasha.
And you need to send minutes, the agenda in advance.
Yes.
And, have you
We
sent
need
the
a meeting
agenda?
to create that agenda.
And it can't be a 2-day meeting.
You
It has
sent
to be a
the
week
agenda,
long.
but it was not in the body of an email, of a
Yes.
letter. So you need to put it in the body of a letter.
And secondly, the format in which we usually send these things is this, and not, hey, okay.
So the time comes and you don't hold a meeting. Robyn, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for allowing me the opportunity to speak about this important issue. Thank you.
Yeah, like you said, we'll call you back
Yeah,
here
please do.
after some time just to keep track of what's happening in terms of housing, keeping the conversation about housing alive and kicking. And as you walk out, you'll be meeting with the PS for planning. Talk to him about the plans.
I will do that.
Tell
I
him
used to
more.
actually work at the Ministry of Planning, so that's been exciting.
Bas. So
Thank
you will
you.
meet with the man who is the boss of the people that you left there.